Hello and welcome to Forces for Justice, a podcast that explores the connection between society and the environment and the urgent issues arising at their intersection. In each episode, we sit down with someone from the Old Westbury community to learn about the ideas, stories, and solutions shaping a more just and sustainable planet. Whether we're talking about climate change, pollution, water access, or food justice, we're asking the same core question: how can we be part of creating a more equitable and resilient future? I'm your host, Dr. Ella Tokai. I'm a professor in the History and Philosophy Department, but I'm also a fellow for Old Westbury's Social and Environmental Justice Institute, or the Seji. If you're not familiar with the Seji, we're an institute on campus dedicated to making change happen through education, research, and community engagement. We tackle the hard questions around justice and sustainability, and we believe in empowering everyone to help build a better world. My guest today is Dr. Claudia Diaz-Combs, who became a member of the Old Westbury faculty in 2024. Dr. Diaz-Combs is a professor of environmental studies in the Department of History and Philosophy. She holds a PhD in geography from Syracuse University, and her research focuses on the political ecology of water, specifically in El Salvador. Dr. Diaz-Combs recently published an article in the journal Water Alternatives, which examines the way strategies employed by labor unions can help secure water justice. She's also working on research that explores the relationship between water governance and the rise of authoritarianism in El Salvador. In addition to her academic work, Dr. Diaz-Combs is a member of Old Westbury's relatively new Campus Environmental Education Center, and she also helps to oversee the rapidly growing environmental studies program. When she's not busy doing all of the above, she spends her time reading, watching movies, and when she can find the time, going to the zoo. Thanks so much for joining us today, Dr. Diaz-Combs, and welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
So to kick us off, could you tell us a little bit about what first drew you to the field of geography or the topic of water justice, and why you specifically focus on El Salvador?
I'll start with the water one first. So I'm from Arizona, which, if you've never been, you probably know that it's a desert. It's really dry. So I think I've always been interested in issues around water because they've been present in my life, for a long time. So I started off as an environmental science major. That's what I got my bachelor's in, and increasingly became kind of concerned with thinking about issues not only around the science of water, but just like politics and environmental movements around water. And so in Arizona, I went to the University of Arizona. I got a master's in public health and Latin American studies. And during that time, I was learning about issues about water pollution, specifically on oil contamination in Ecuador. So that's when I ended up doing my work in. And the public health program that I did in Arizona was quite sciencey, I'll say, and it was great. I learned a lot, but I became I wanted to learn more about the politics part. And so when I was in grad school, I took a class on political ecology, which is essentially thinking about looking at environmental issues, but then trying to understand the political and the social forces that goes into explaining why these ecological problems happen. And my professor was a geographer. And so I met with her in office hours, and she was telling me about geography, and at the time I was sort of thinking about next steps, and she said, why don't you apply for a PhD program in geography? So I did at Syracuse, and I ended up going there, and this was around 2018. So 2018 also coincidentally was a time where there was a lot of water justice issues happening in El Salvador. Now I should say that my dad's from El Salvador, so I think there was always a part of me that wanted to do work there, to kind of feel more of a connection to that place. I grew up hearing stories about my dad, his family, his friends, and the time that he was a young man there was quite tumultuous with civil wars and things. So I guess that's all to say that I have learned about activism happening in El Salvador, but always in the social realm. So I figured, this is a place where there's a lot of social movements and things happening around politics and human rights and justice. But in 2018, I was reading the news about what was happening there, and there were these huge protests about water and water privatization. And it was just very interesting because I thought, I didn't know that this was an issue there, so I read more and more into it. And it was coincidence that I was starting the PhD program, so kind of just my interest sort of went in that direction, away from Ecuador, but more towards thinking about something closer to my family and my interests as well.
Yeah. So this is sort of related to what you were saying about sort of starting out in Arizona.
Yeah.
So do you keep on top of the water issues in Arizona now that you don't live there anymore? Or do you see any connections between the kind of water struggles going on there and maybe those happening in Latin America?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't keep up as much with water politics in Arizona.
I mean, it's hard when you're not there.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly like, I'll get newsletters from the University of Arizona and there'll be things on there, so I'll read that. But I do know kind of the overlap between Arizona and water, and especially water rights, is something that's very much contested there, especially because there's huge agriculture there, agribusiness, so that's always going to be a point of controversy or conflict because those agribusiness are quite powerful, and so they're always going to butt heads with kind of municipal use, if you want to put it that way. That's the case in El Salvador too. Very different climates, but it's an issue about water rights, water access, who has say in where water goes, drinking water versus agribusiness versus bottling companies. So I do see a lot of overlap. So even if I'm not always paying attention to what's happening in Arizona, when I read about it, I can think, oh, this is something that I'm familiar with, I have thoughts about. Yeah.
So I have to admit, I think when it comes to the questions that you were just asking, like what gets done with water, where does it come from, these sorts of things, these are questions that even in New York, I don't really know the answers to those questions. I don't really know how the water system works. I don't know, maybe I know a little bit about it. I know where my water in New York City comes from. But if someone wanted to have access to this information, what would they do? Like, is it as simple as a Google search, or how do you go about finding out like the details about where things like water come from out of your tap?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have like a neat answer to that. I think, and maybe this is something that can go back to my interest in geography. Geographers look at issues at different scales, right? So it could be local issues, regional, nationwide, and then global. So I think water fits into all those scales too. And so I guess if a person was interested in learning about water in their state or county or the country, I think a Google search would start, but I would also just recommend like seeing where your water comes from. So I don't know, where does water from Nassau County come from? And actually when I pose this question to students, a lot of them actually do know, the municipal water distributors. But I think even a more interesting question than like, where does the water come from? To me anyway, would be who works together to try to figure out issues about pollution or quality of water or distribution, justice, right? That's kind of at the themes of this podcast. And that goes beyond the municipal government level, and it starts to bring in organizations and activists and, I don't know, educators as well. So I think for me, I try to emphasize all the time, think of all the people that work together to make this very important resource come to us in our homes.
Yeah. And speaking of geography, so is it fairly normal, is it part of being a geographer that you do a lot of field work?
Yeah, I would say as a human geographer or an environmental human geographer, yeah, I think so. Of course, it's not the only method, but the kind of work that I like to do, which is really kind of understanding what's happening on the ground, these particular places that are outside of the United States, yes, it's fairly common to do not only like field work, but also extensive field work. So you're there for, at least a month, sometimes longer. When I did my research in El Salvador, I was there for about like 10 months, I want to say, split up over time.
Sure.
But that really helps.
It's a substantial amount of time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But it really gives you a sense of what's happening in a place. And I think that it's also helps you develop kind of a real understanding of what's happening there, even though you're not from there. Being there for more time helps with that.
That kind of ties into another one of my questions about your experience doing field work in El Salvador. Like, what did you learn? What was it like? Was it did it meet your expectations? Did it subvert your expectations? Was it hard?
Yeah. It was hard, yes. But it was really exciting, challenging. So I was in El Salvador for my field work from 2022 through 2023, but I had been in smaller chunks of time since 2019. But for that year, I was there for a much longer amount of time by myself, which was in and of itself, I think, something that I wasn't sure that I could do initially. Yeah. I've traveled by myself with friends, with family, but this was the first time I was there for this fixed amount of time where I was really had a purpose, which was, you need to answer these questions that you have for your research, you need to write things, you need to contact people, cold calling, which is literally a lot of what I did. So I think initially when I was there, like the first month, I was kind of like, oh, well, okay, I'll say the first couple of weeks, I was thinking, this is okay, I'm doing a lot of computer work, calling people, but then there would be moments where, little things were really bothering me, like, I don't know, my chair was really not, it was uncomfortable or something. So these were things where I was like, okay, I'm really having to make decisions about things I didn't think I would, which was a way for me to figure out, okay, I'm in this for the long haul. So the chair is just one example. Yeah. But I would say that I went in with a plan, with questions, with ideas, and it was important for me to be flexible because when you're there, a lot of things are thrown your way. You have to make decisions about changing methods or changing people you're going to talk to, maybe searching out new people, maybe thinking of different questions. So I think initially I hadn't realized how flexible one has to be when they're there. But that was definitely something that you adjust to and you get better at. And also it becomes a lot less stressful over time.
Did you find yourself participating in water activism while you were there, or was there an attempt on your part to kind of maintain a distance for your research, or how immersed were you able to get in the culture?
I did try to participate as much as I could. So interviewing people involved in social movements and labor unions was, I would say, the most important method for me. But people don't always have time to talk to you, which is another thing you have to kind of be flexible with. When I was there, I thought, okay, I have a lot of time, so if they need to do this in another time or they can't, just got to find another way to answer your question, or maybe rephrase your question. So if I couldn't interview people, I always was keeping track of events that were going on, like marches or protests or meetings, things like that. I tried to always go. So as much as I could, I did try to be involved and just, not participating, like asking questions or giving my thoughts about my understandings of what was going on in El Salvador and water issues, but just paying attention to what people were saying. And I think something else that I would do is record a lot, like on my phone or, mostly on my phone. I had a recorder sometimes too. So I tried not to, like when I was there, be constantly taking notes. I just tried to be in the moment and listen. So I would say actually I didn't really try to distance myself from my, positionality, if you want to use that kind of word. I really tried to be in it with people, while always understanding that I am here to get data in some ways that maybe does set me apart from other people. But, something that I try to do now that I've been away from there, is I check in with people. So even just last week I was checking in with people because the 31st, so Halloween, is actually in El Salvador, Salvadoran Unionist Day. And they have these big marches every year. So I just texted people that I knew just to be like, Happy Unionist Day, how did it go? And I got some videos from people. So I still see myself as very much connected to what's going on there. And maybe not in the same way as when I was a student, but a lot of the people that I talk to there, I see as my friends as well.
Yeah, and could you speak a little bit about, since you brought up labor unions, could you speak a little bit about why you think labor unions are so important, and not just in a broad sense, but specifically when it comes to environmental justice or water justice?
Yeah, I think the short answer is just the kind of pressure that unions can put on, a government or an employer is a sort of power that other stakeholders or organizations maybe don't have quite as firmly as unions do. So that's why I find them to be so important. And I know that often unions are fighting for rights at the workplace, or benefits and pay and things like that for their workforce.
Yeah.
Right? And those are incredibly important. I mean, we need those things to survive.
Yeah.
But water is something that plays into all of those factors as well. Someone fighting for rights or safety at a workplace, that could include issues that have to do with water. Maybe pay, issues that having to do with pay or compensation could be related to issues with water shutoffs or costs of bills in the household. So I think that maybe initially when one thinks of environmental justice, they wouldn't think of those connections to workplace or economic issues. But I think at its core, it does include those things. So workers, when I'm speaking to them, they could immediately make these connections with the environment through talking about water. So I think that structural pressure that unions have can certainly be leveraged and used in thinking about how to connect to the environment and how to bring justice to everybody if they are, a person who works for a living. So I think that I see a very natural blending of these two areas of study.
Yeah, I was going to ask how apparent that connection, that environmental connection, is to people in labor movements. And it sort of sounds like you're saying, at least in your experience, that connection was like very explicit and clear, and not something that necessarily needed to be made. Do you think that's unique to El Salvador, or do you think that that's something that could also be helpful for labor movements here to use that leverage for environmental justice issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be. I don't think it's unique to El Salvador or even Latin America. I think anyone who has some kind of connection to an environmental thing. So I use water because of my research, but I mean just land in general, right? Land leads us to think about property and rights and all these things. So I do think that there is a very natural connection between these things. But I do think what I try to do, and maybe is something that others, I know others have done, but others can continue to do, is just to make these connections more rooted in sort of worker struggles as well, having to do with cost or with safety, health, things like that. I think. And then, saying all these things, what comes to mind are issues having to do with pollution, with air pollution, water pollution, also climate, right? What is it, with the kind of weather getting warmer, hazards with heat protections. So I do think there's many ways that these connections can be made, environmentally explicit.
Sure, yeah. Do you think that this kind of leverage is really more effective in urban contexts? So that's one question. And I think another question would be, do you think are there any environmental justice issues or environmental issues that are kind of beyond the scope of a labor movement and the concerns of a labor movement?
Well, I don't think so to answer the first question, my area is mostly in urban contexts, so that's what I would be most familiar with. But I do think that some of the issues that happen in workplaces, sort of the rural-urban divide, like these same things would happen in both of those contexts. So I think that there can definitely be working together in that sense.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned if there were environmental justice issues beyond the scope of unions. So do you mean maybe bringing in other partners or people to work with them in that sense?
Or I think issues where the kind of leverage, that important leverage that labor unions can have, wouldn't really be applicable to. Are there things that wouldn't be applicable to or helpful to, where that leverage wouldn't be effective?
That's a good question. I mean, for some reason, what came to mind when you were saying that is a field that I'm not as familiar with, but I see a lot of discussion about, is sort of considering the more than human environments, right? So that could possibly be one where maybe the leverage that I'm talking about, these strategies need to be adjusted a bit or expanded, so to speak. And that could also include, rural organizations as well that focus on these kinds of more symbolic, maybe. Like I said, it's not my field that I'm as familiar with, but that did come to mind as something to kind of consider when thinking about these strategies.
Yeah. I mean, very open question, but
yeah. No, it's interesting.
Yeah. Have you, I could be completely wrong about this, but it seems like recently there has been this tendency to put environmental issues and environmental justice issues more on the back burner. There are a lot of reasons for that, like the current political climate. I'm even thinking like the essay that Bill Gates released a couple weeks ago, where he was sort of saying like, we need to stop investing in climate change solutions, and we deal with these other problems, that sort of thing. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because I mean, I think the importance of your work is really showing like these are not inseparable, and that really like the environmental justice issues are very much on the forefront of all of the other issues that affect us as workers, as humans. So do you have any just thoughts or comments about that tendency that we're seeing?
No, I mean, I do agree that often environmental issues are not front-loaded or centered, and that's a shame. But at the same time, sometimes they are immediately, like right at the beginning. So, or what people talk about a lot. So one thing that came to mind when you were talking about, Bill Gates and just the current political situation is that it seems to me that there's a lot of discussion right now about energy and the price of our energy bills, which are skyrocketing. I mean, that's a fundamentally environmental and worker issue together, and you don't even really have to explain it. You can say like, energy costs are really high right now. We need to think about ways in which to find energy sources that are abundant, that can make not only our bills go down, but do something about the climate crisis. So I think if you were to say that to anybody, maybe not anybody, but for a lot of people, they would immediately agree with you. And there you are, you're already kind of hitting the environmentalism worker union couplet right there, that kind of explanation. So I don't know, I think in a lot of cases, there are a lot of things going on where maybe in an environmental justice, if we centered it, or if we like phrase it in that way, is not going to be the foremost issue, but it certainly doesn't mean that the things that are being talked about are not also environmental justice issues.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you think of any one example or case or concept that if someone on Long Island or in the Old Westbury community just had to know this one thing or be aware of one issue, is there anything in particular that comes to mind? Yeah, so being a person who cares about the environment, it's important for me, and I'm sure others, you would agree, to stay optimistic and to stay positive, right? And especially as people who work at a university with younger generations, you have, that's something you really have to instill, because, we're all going to be around for a while. So this doomerism approach to the environment, to me, is not only not useful, but it's also not accurate. So this past summer, I read a wonderful book that I would recommend to anybody who's interested in environmental issues or just the environment, called Not the End of the World by Hannah Ritchie. So she's an environmental scientist, data scientist, and it just came out. And she basically talks about all these big issues: climate, air pollution, deforestation, wildlife conservation, I think overfishing. There's a lot of them. But she talks about how much progress we actually have made over time, and how much progress we can continue to make because of the advances in technology that we have done, not only in the US or in the UK where she's from, but globally as well. So I would recommend that to anybody now, in the Old Westbury community, in Long Island, in New York State. And with that, I would say that while some headlines in the news can be pretty bleak
to say the least.
Understatement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the environmental front, there are actually quite a lot of progress, like quite a lot of advancements that we've done environmentally. So for one, just that I read even just a couple of days ago, deforestation in the Amazon has been on the decline, and pretty rapidly as well. I mean, there were some years during the Bolsonaro administration where there was an uptick, but it has continued to decline. Same with information about, or like tracking of species extinctions. Those have also slowed down. And in some cases, species are coming back quite rapidly. Like several, I won't go into the details, but several species that were on the endangered lists are no longer on there. So, I think it's important to like maybe look beyond the headlines to see the good environmental stories that come from conservation efforts, from people who really are passionate and care about these things. And what they're doing together, which would include unions, is working in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that is an important reminder that the headlines and things we might see in news outlets or in social media are designed to induce rage or some sort of negative affect to promote engagement with it. And so it would make sense that these more positive things are not going to be as in the news and making the rounds in the headlines as much as all of the negative things. So yeah, that's an important reminder that we are all in these little bubbles and not seeing the good things that are happening.
I would say not only induce rage, but also to demobilize people and to kind of breed cynicism, which I don't know. In my experience, even just here at the school, I don't actually see when I talk to students. They seem, I've actually had them read some of Richie, and they'll say that it makes them feel hopeful, and they feel encouraged and happy, and about what they're reading and wanting to do something about it. So, I don't think that people are as cynical as maybe people try to convince us that they are.
Yeah, I mean, and if you are feeling despair or you're feeling cynical, I mean, that is going to completely undermine any attempt or any energy you have to be in solidarity with others or to fight for something. And maybe even the fact that people are cynical or feeling despair is the thing that we should question too, whether that actually is the case. Because even believing that just makes us feel like, well, I'm not even going to bother to talk about these with other people because everybody else is feeling just as cynical as I am.
Yeah, I think people still feel hope, tremendous hope.
Yeah.
And not only hope, but they want things. So I think another thing I try to do in my own life in teaching, but also just in my own beliefs, is just to never kind of think that I can't demand big things. On the environmental front, things to be done, but in other aspects as well. And I would say that others probably feel the same way, but maybe they don't know that they can ask for big things and demand, not only ask, but demand big things, big changes.
Yeah. And to add on to that too, sometimes there is a sense that maybe feeds into this despair and cynicism that there is no alternative, but there actually are alternatives. This is not a foregone conclusion in any way, so kind of similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay, well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Not that I can think of right now, just that it's encouraging for me to, say these things, talk about these things, and then have positive reception to them. And that, is great because I think that's a fairly recent development, an understanding of mine. And so, I guess to bring it back to the beginning of the conversation, we've been sort of talking about Westbury and students, but when I have these conversations with people in El Salvador or in other countries as well, I also get a sense that people are hopeful. Maybe it's an inherent human quality.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect place to end the conversation as well on this very optimistic and hopeful note. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed and for joining us. And also thank you to the Media Innovation Center as well for all of their help. Thank you.